This is Invested in Climate with Jason Rissman. I see climate as the world's biggest, most diverse, most important movement in human history. Millions of people dedicate themselves every day to protecting the planet. This podcast shares conversations with advocates, entrepreneurs, investors, policy experts, and anyone else that can push our thinking about what's possible and what needs to happen to address climate change. If you have ideas for episodes or feedback, get in touch on LinkedIn. If you enjoy the show, please leave a rating on Apple or Spotify. I'm currently building a new venture. It's related to storytelling and how we engage all sorts of folks in meaningful climate action. If you have expertise in this area, big ideas, or examples of something that's really working, get in touch. Thanks for listening and for doing whatever it is you're doing to support climate progress. Okay, let's get started.
It's interesting because the whole world is slowly transitioning to renewables, and solar is being deployed more than anything else around the world right now. It's like, this is the power of the future. And so grid-tied solar, like big utility scale solar projects, like that is what will be powering civilization soon enough.
Hi, folks. As you know, with government funding cuts slowing climate progress across the board, philanthropy is more important than ever. Private foundations offer just a drop in the bucket compared to government funding, but they can still play an important role and catalyze other forms of capital. That's why I'm doing a series of episodes on climate philanthropy. If you have ideas of other foundations that should be part of the series, please reach out through investedinclimate.com. We spoke recently with Pisces Foundation President David Beckman on the importance of funding movement infrastructure. Today's episode considers a totally different perspective. Alex Honnold is perhaps the world's most famous professional rock climber. He's also a true climate leader. He decided years ago to donate 1/3 of his income to address climate change, and he uses his platform to raise awareness and money to help people in remote communities develop solar projects. Alex brings a no-nonsense, pragmatic approach, but also one that is deeply compassionate, prioritizing projects that change people's lives. In this conversation, I'm joined by Alex, as well as Emily Tatesworth, Executive Director of the Honnold Foundation. We, of course, talk a bit about Alex's history, his climbing, and how it's influenced his climate philanthropy. We go deep into his foundation's theory of change, some tangible examples of projects they've supported, and the broader impact they have in elevating a portfolio of worthy projects for other funders to consider. Alex's resources are not vast. His dedication runs deep, however, and even with modest resources, he's been able to support over 100 projects that have impacted thousands of people. I find Alex's example truly inspiring, and I hope this episode inspires you to move past the feeling that we sometimes all feel, that our resources or influence are too small to have an impact, and just do what we can. Here we go. Enjoy. Emily and Alex, welcome to Invested in Climate. Great to see you both and have you here.
Thanks for having us.
I've been looking forward to this conversation. As you know, I'm a fan of what you're doing and think your ability to have an outsized impact is really inspiring. Let's start by learning a bit about both of you. Alex, you're well known as a rock climber and actually is the only person to climb El Cap in Yosemite with no ropes, an accomplishment that millions of people got to witness in the Oscar award-winning film Free Solo. You're not as well known as a climate leader, philanthropist, and advocate. Will you tell us a bit about your background working on climate change?
Well, yeah, I'm like, would I call myself any of those things? But I did start the Honnold Foundation in 2012, and we've been supporting community solar projects around the world since then. So I think we've now put maybe $10 million into community solar around the world. You know, in the grand scheme of things, that's nothing, but I've certainly been interested in the environment and trying to do what I can for the last decade.
Fantastic. And what got you interested? How did you originally get interested in doing what you can to protect the planet?
I think as a professional rock climber, I'm in nature all the time. I'm climbing outdoors, I'm climbing big mountains, but I've also traveled widely for expeditions to different parts of the world, like often the most rural, remote places on Earth. And so it's hard to go to those places without caring about nature and about caring about protecting those places and protecting the environment. But I've also just read a lot of environmental nonfiction and just curious about the planet and worried about the planet, and just felt like I should try to do what I could.
Amazing. I read that you gave up meat a long time ago, partially, I think, driven by your interest in climate and the environment. But as a professional athlete, you, of course, need to optimize your diet for performance. What tips can you offer others about eating sustainably and still finding the energy and strength that folks need?
Yeah, actually, I think I mostly went vegetarian the same year that I started the Honnold Foundation. It was all part of, I think, 2012. I was like, you know what? It's time for me to be better, do something better in the world, try to minimize my impact. It's funny. I wonder if I have any notes left. I wonder what I read that year, because I must have read a couple key books or something and been like, this is the year that I should really start thinking about the impact that I'm having as an individual and what I can do to make a difference and make the world slightly better. But in terms of diet, I say that I'm mostly vegetarian, or I used to call myself an aspiring vegan. I'm semi-plant-based. But the thing is, I've always been guided more by the environmental impact. I'm not as concerned about, obviously, like the ethics of animal cruelty and all. I care about those things, but not as much. And so if something's going to be wasted or if something's already prepared, I'll eat meat, like for convenience. And especially with travel and whatever else, I'm not ethically opposed. But I just don't buy meat, and I don't really buy dairy. And our family doesn't really. Actually, my wife now sometimes buys meat. And really, is that something we do? But I'd say it's very sparing. I've always felt like it's better not to have labels like that, because if you only eat meat 5% of the time, that's still 95% better than eating it all the time. You know what I mean? It's quite a spectrum. And I'm kind of like, if you just think about your environmental impact when you make your dietary choices, that's a big step in the right direction. And so I try not to get too hung up on the details of it, but I just try to eat, low on the food chain if I can.
Awesome. Emily, what about you? Tell us a bit about what got you involved in working on climate, and how did you end up teaming up with Alex?
It's funny. I think that diet-wise, anyway, we kind of ended up in the same place because I was raised vegetarian. Nobody who knows me is surprised that I was raised by hippies in Oregon, and I didn't eat meat until I was in my 20s. And same reason, I think, Alex, as you, just pragmatically have to travel a lot for work and eat meat. And I think really I was raised with this idea of being environmentally conscious, thinking about what you eat, all of that. But I didn't go into climate and energy work right away. I spent a lot of time doing public health work, traveling a lot, started eating meat because I was working a lot in post-war Liberia, and a place where there's not a lot of tofu. Started traveling a lot and thinking about the intersection of climate and community development work, and in my personal life, just seeing the urgency of working on climate from whatever angle. And I was focused a lot on girls' rights and gender equity. And there was not a lot of crossover in the conversation between gender and climate at that point, 10 or 15 years ago. And so I just made it my personal commitment to try to bring those two things together. And I was looking for an opportunity where I could continue to do community development in partnership with marginalized communities, but have more of a climate and energy focus. And I just came across, a listing for the Honnold Foundation Executive Director job. I don't even know if they mentioned you, Alex, in the listing. It was kind of cryptic. It just felt like the job description was written for me. And there is not a lot of work, and certainly when I joined, not a lot of work that was really looking at energy and renewables from that community lens. And so the fact that the Honnold Foundation brought those two things together really brought me to the work and has kept me here. And Alex has heard me say this, but he's my best ever boss. So he's also kept me here. He's a great thought partner, a really good ambassador for the work, and also flexible of how we do things. So we're an organization that has a 4-day work week and is flexible in terms of where people can work and how they work. And having that kind of freedom to do the work on our own terms has been exciting. So
Alex, let's dive in and learn about the work of the foundation. Can you give a sense of high level, what is the foundation doing and what's your strategy?
So high level, the foundation supports community solar projects around the world. So any kind of community-led organization that's using solar to, I don't want to say empower, it's kind of hokey, but to make the lives better for their community in whatever way makes sense. And so sometimes that just means energy access. Sometimes that means lights for the first time. Sometimes that means power and refrigeration, whatever else, like food processing.
Emily, what about you in your own words? How do you see the strategy's foundation? What are you focused on and why?
So the Honnold Foundation's mission is really to partner with marginalized communities to accelerate and advance renewable energy access. And we do that through 3 core strategies: trust-based grant making to community and grassroots groups around the world, capacity support, organizational development, executive coaching, communications and marketing support, and then amplification and storytelling. And that's really about finding and funding and elevating the brilliant solutions developed by grassroots leaders and organizations around the world, helping make sure their organizations are strong and sustainable, and then connecting them to a broader ecosystem of support and fundraising. And that's really our mission, is to, in some places be the first international funder a group has ever had, to find these early stage opportunities where we're maybe taking a little bit more of a risk than other institutional funders would, and then to help those projects grow and be sustainable over the long term.
Alex, Emily, tell me about the decision to focus at the community level on community solar. Why focus on small local communities and why solar?
I'll take a crack at it first. I mean, solar, just because I think it's such an elegant solution to so many different problems of energy access. And I saw this firsthand on so many expeditions around the world. There are just a lot of parts of the earth that will never have grid tied power. It's like realistically, nobody is ever going to build energy infrastructure in a lot of the world. And solar is a way for those types of very remote communities to still have access to the modern world, basically, to still use devices and reap the quality of life benefits of having light or having refrigeration, having whatever else. And so I was like, solar is just so clearly the future is the answer. It's like, there's just so much energy bathing on Earth every day. You're sort of like, why are we not using that? And especially when you contrast it against our other forms of energy right now, like when you imagine something like mountaintop removal coal mining or something where you're like, that is so crazy compared to just putting some panels on your roof. Anyway, I was like, oh, solar is obviously the answer. And then community-led solar, I think, is partially just acknowledging the reality that as a professional rock climber, I'm never going to donate that much money to these types of projects. If I had founded Microsoft, yeah, maybe we'd be doing huge scale, like government things. But in a way, it's now that we've been doing this work for a decade, though, I'm starting to think that really this is the only way the work should be done, though, because it has the biggest human impact. It happens faster, the projects. And it just, to me, it just seems more equitable. It's like more fair. It's like the people that need it the most get it reap the benefits sooner. And it just seems like the right way.
Emily, what about from you? You've worked in a bunch of different missions and roles in organizations. Tell me why the focus on community-led projects?
Yeah, it's surprising the number of people that have asked me why we don't invest in nuclear. And
community-led nuclear?
Right, exactly. That's our next phase, I guess. From my perspective, solar is the most cost-effective, the most abundant, the most flexible form of renewable energy. And for communities in like the remote Ecuadorian Amazon or the tundra of Alaska or cities in the US, it really is the best way for them to transition to renewable energy. And why the community lens? I think these are communities that have been left out of all of the big development and climate conversations over the last 50 years, right? And so when you put resources and power in their hands, they have the ability to make change on their own terms and to use this adaptable form of renewable energy to both improve the environment around them, to combat climate change, and to invest in things like education, healthcare, and economic development. So really is this elegant solution that is so adaptable regardless of where you are in the world.
The other thing about community-led, I mean, and I was just saying this, but basically people know what they need. And so I think that when you focus on community-led projects, you're doing the things that they actually need. It's like the projects are more likely to succeed when they're chosen by the community, they're implemented by the community. It's like, it's way better than airdropping something in where you're like, here's a solution that you need. It's like, if people don't want it, then they're not going to use it, even if it is a good idea. So it's like, you kind of have to just fund people's good ideas. If it's their project, they know what they need and they can execute it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I love about this work, so much infrastructure investment, whether it's like wells or schools or solar energy, is like brought in by a big company or organization and dropped into communities. And there's not a lot of follow through around how it happens, who's sustaining the system, and like why it's there in the first place. And when you lead with the community component, you ensure this kind of sustainability and buy-in that isn't always there when you think about renewable energy infrastructure. And so that kind of putting the communities in the driver's seat. I mean, I think if we think about our own perspective, right? If somebody came into your community and said, here's the solution and it's the best thing for you and like you should adopt it, you're much less likely to do it than if the idea came from you. And so I think just investing in that,
Yeah, when you think about that, you're in your own home. Like if somebody showed up and said, here's this trinket that you should be using, you're like, I don't want that. Like, I don't, if it's not your choice, you don't want that. And I think when you expand that out to a community scale, it's the same thing. It's like if you show up in some rural community and you're like, here's this thing that's going to change your lives, like they don't care. But if they choose, like, this is this thing that we want, and then you help them execute that plan, then that's perfect. Then everybody wins.
Let's make it more tangible. Love to hear about some of the projects that you've supported. Give us a sense of who are these communities, who are the people behind the projects, and what have you been able to support?
Yeah, I mean, we are coming up on this really exciting milestone. By the end of this year, we will have supported over 100 projects and invested over $10 million in renewable energy access around the world. And yeah, super excited about that. And really, it looks so different depending on the community. I think one of the elegant things about putting communities first is that they can use solar energy and renewables in such innovative and amazing ways. And so just such a huge diversity of what that looks like on the ground. So it might be solar powered boats in the Ecuadorian Amazon, or workforce development in coal country in the US, or girls' education in Guatemala. And so for me, really what keeps me motivated is seeing the sort of community-led ingenuity and innovation that happens on the front lines of climate change. I personally, I think this is something that Alex and I share, really love our girls' education and gender equity work. One project that keeps me really motivated is this organization called CIDE in rural indigenous communities in central Mexico. And they have built these community resilience hubs that combined solar access and satellite internet to create digital workspaces, economic development hubs, and to train women who are marketing their products and developing their own businesses and how to use the internet, how to commercialize their products, how to find new markets. And so in that way, solar really becomes like the driving engine of economic development on these women's own terms. And they pay that back by investing in their kids' education and finding new markets and connecting to a broader ecosystem of economic support. And so it really is this sort of like entry point into a world of where women are in the driver's seat in terms of their own future and their own economic development, and something I really love about the work.
Honestly, this is why I started the foundation, is projects like that where it's like win-win-win, where you're sort of like, oh, it just makes sense. Like, why isn't the world that way? And I feel like so many of the projects that we fund seem like great ideas where you're kind of like, why hasn't that happened already? Like, why is that not a thing? Like, why? You're like, that's so clearly the way the world should be. Like, why is it not that way already? Like, what can we do to make it that way?
Tell me more. Emily, you mentioned that that's part of your focus on girls' education and gender equity work. Sounds like that is maybe a bucket and not something that you originally described as one of the focus of the foundation, but seemingly, as Alex described, you're able to tackle multiple problems by bringing power and energy that's clean into communities. Are there other lenses that you're using, or are there other categories, buckets of work?
Yeah, actually, I mean, I'm curious what you're going to say, but I'm like, are there buckets? I mean, I think in general, we evaluate the projects case by case, and if they have a big enough impact for the community, like if they're win-win in the right ways, then we fund them if we can. But I don't think that we have preset buckets like that, really, do we?
No, and I think one of the things, like, again, putting communities in the driver's seat, like, we didn't come in with these priorities of this is the kind of solar we want to see, but organically, especially over the last few years, as we've been able to grow the number of projects and the places where we've supported projects, there's sort of organic themes that I think have started to emerge. So a big one is disaster preparedness and climate resilience. So like in Adjuntas, Puerto Rico, this microgrid that was developed in the wake of Hurricane Maria to when the power goes out and the grid is down, in the case of storms, they are able to keep the power on, to keep businesses going, to provide refrigeration for medicine and a place for people to charge their cell phones. And so as climate change worsens storms, that's something we've seen from communities around the world. So disaster preparedness is a big one. I think gender equity and the intersection of gender and climate is another thing that organically has kind of emerged from the grassroots. And so there's a few of those things where we didn't impose that on the projects that we work on, but they have just organically become a need and a shared need across our portfolio. The other thing, when I think about like the themes that we really focus on, a few years ago, we were funding anywhere in the world, and we're a relatively small foundation, right? And so we took a look at where there wasn't this kind of funding available, what the needs were, and where we thought we could make a catalytic difference. And we zeroed in a little bit on, focused more on the Western Hemisphere and island nations around the world. And so geographically, we've narrowed in a little bit. And then within that geography, really focusing on investing in Indigenous and Black majority communities, because those are the most historically disinvested, and especially when it comes to renewable and clean energy access. And so thematically, I think those are the other things that I would call out, as whether it's renewable energy or some other aspect of climate change work, just going where the need is greatest and where communities have been historically disinvested, that's where you're going to make the biggest difference.
Alex, we heard from Emily and some of the organizations and projects that have stood out for her. What about for you? Any that's come to mind?
Emily mentioned Adjuntas, the community in Puerto Rico. I mean, that was the biggest and most complicated project that we'd taken on at that time. It was the first cooperative solar microgrid in Puerto Rico, and it was really an innovative thing for the island. And to me, it was a perfect example of the sort of projects that I like to fund where you're like, why isn't this the way? Because like with Puerto Rico in particular, their energy infrastructure is crazy. It's so bad. And it's old. It's all, it's basically like diesel generators that ship from the US. It's one of those things where for an island that's always in the sun, like why would you be shipping diesel from the States to power plants that are vulnerable to disruption through, everything about it doesn't really make sense. And you're kind of like, why aren't there solar microgrids all over the island? Like, why isn't this the case in every community? At least for the disaster preparedness side, like why not at least have a little core in each community that can withstand? Anyway, and so that project, when we took it on, was the biggest in scope and complexity of anything that we had done to that point. And so I was like, oh, wow, we're really like doing something in the world that feels like it should be done and could potentially be a model for other projects like that around the Caribbean. I don't know. There are plenty of other examples like that. But that's the thing, is that each project is kind of case by case. You're like, oh, what a good idea. Like, why is this not being done? Like, why hasn't anybody funded this?
Yeah. One thing I would say too about these projects that are sort of like the first of their kind, and like Adjuntas is a great example, right? People came to Adjuntas when the microgrid was built and said, oh, this is something we would want in our community. And we want to replicate this in the Dominican Republic or another island nation somewhere in the world. And that's something that I think I've learned doing this work over the last few years is sometimes people look at this and say, oh, this is sort of like a scattered network of individual projects. Like, where's the scale and where's the sort of movement building part of this? And it's been so clear to me that these individual projects drive demand because people see the impact firsthand, and it is making their lives better and protecting the environment around them. And like in Brazil, for example, there's this small island community that we've worked with. They developed solar-powered acai processing and brought in satellite internet with the solar and created all of these job opportunities and education pathways for young people. And it brought people back to the community. And then other communities around, when they were coming in to go to the market or to see friends, they saw the solar and they started to demand that from their local authorities. And so I think that these are individual projects, but Adjuntas and this project, Ataik in Brazil, are such great examples of like community demand comes from seeing the impact firsthand, not some like white paper that you read or like story that you heard from somebody else. Really, that like tangible benefit is what drives people to join the movement to fight for renewables.
Can I just get on a little soapbox and just ramble about a thing? I mean, this is unrelated to anything you might want to ask about. But when we're talking about this community-led solar, it's like, so we've deployed $10 million around these different projects, which is like nothing in the grand scheme of things. And it's interesting because the whole worord is slowly transitioning to renewables, and solar is being deployed more than anything else around the world right now. It's like, this is the power of the future. And so grid-tied solar, like big utility scale solar projects, like that is what will be powering civilization soon enough. And yet that just doesn't really have the human impact that these community projects do, because as the grid transitions to renewables, I'm like, that's great. And that's great environmentally, and that's necessary. And yet it's still only giving power to people who already have power. Like it's basically going to help utility shareholders get a better return or whatever. And you're sort of like, oh, that's just not quite inspiring in the human terms that these sort of small scale projects do. And so when you think of big philanthropy or big organizations that are like, oh, we're going to deploy billions of dollars in climate, it should be at this scale, because at the community scale, you just have such a big human impact. It has such an impact on people's lives. And ultimately, I think that's what matters. It's like this way you can have the environmental side of it. You can like help change the world, but it really makes people's lives better. And I think that's an important thing that's maybe lacking in some of the conversation around climate and sort of the transition to renewables.
Let's talk about other philanthropy, because as I said, I'm a fan of the foundation because I think that you are punching above your weight in some interesting ways. And one of those is the way that you are trying to elevate this opportunity. We should note that the Honnold Foundation isn't just Alex's income that's funding it, but you also have support from corporate partners, foundations, and individual donors. And so anyone that's inspired by what you're hearing, you can go onto the website and donate directly. But I also saw in your latest impact report that you're elevating not just the projects that you're able to fund, but also that there's many others that you weren't able to, and that you published that list and that you're trying to drive awareness for that. Give us a sense of the opportunity for other philanthropists that you see, either the impact that they can have in offering you more capital or in directly funding some of the projects that you've learned about.
Yeah, I think we are an intermediary. So Alex covers some of our core operating costs and staffing. And then we raise funds to directly support our partners around the world in partnership with foundations and corporate and individual supporters. And so we at the moment are giving between 2 and 3 million a year to partners around the world. And we have a pipeline of over $100 million of projects that are quote unquote shovel ready, like ready to go, vetted by us, have incredible catalytic potential. And I think this really is an opportunity to invite other philanthropy to invest in the community lens when it comes to renewable energy. Things that don't have a financial ROI are still worth doing. And it's been unfortunate seeing so much of the climate philanthropy space really still thinking with traditional sort of scale lens and impact investment. What is the financial side of this? And we really think about the community ROI first. And I would love to be able to scale up to giving $5 million a year and to get to our next 10 million so much quicker than we got to our first 10 million. And it takes all of those approaches, right? Like we need utility scale, we need government investment, we need impact investment, all of those things. But there's so little focus on community renewable and climate solutions. And that's a place where we need to build a bigger coalition. And one of the things that we're working on this year is actually to launch a few collective impact funds. So one to support Indigenous sovereignty in the renewable transition, one to support gender equity in renewables, and one on workforce development. And those are really opportunities for us to stand next to some of our biggest supporters and to invite others to join us, because whether they're resourcing the work directly or through the Honnold Foundation, this is just a place where we need more investment and more partners. And the ROI for communities and the environment is huge with so little investment compared to what you spend on utility scale projects.
In addition to the impact that you're creating through direct funding, I think you're also creating impact through your cultural footprint. On your website, you highlight Alex's sustainability tick list for individuals. It includes 3 main levers: money as power, people and planet, focusing on individual changes, and systemic change. We've largely been focusing on the foundation's approach to money as power. You're also pursuing systemic change through storytelling. And one way you're doing that is by supporting films. Tell us a bit about the kinds of films that you're supporting and how they've helped amplify your work.
We're not storytellers at heart, and that's not exactly what we're doing. But the reality of being a professional climber is that I have a lot of media exposure. And I always felt like one of the things that I could bring to some of this, even just the fact that I put my name on the foundation, the Honnold Foundation, I was kind of like, it seems a little douchey. I was like, I'm not sure if I'm into that. But it's probably going to be able to raise more money for the causes that I care about. And so the same applies for sort of media exposure and that kind of thing, is that I was like, I don't earn that much as a professional climber and I can't give that much money to these projects, but at least I can lend the name, lend the exposure. People are more willing to do video projects with me. I was just kind of like, well, it's sort of an extra benefit that I can bring to this work. And I felt like I should. And now I think the Honnold Foundation team has made that much more professional. It's like now the films we're supporting are at a much higher level. But I think that emphasis on storytelling stemmed from the fact that I'm just already working with so many talented filmmakers and there's so much media interest and there's just so much around that to begin with. I was kind of like, well, I may as well direct some of that towards projects that matter, which is what we've been doing at the foundation.
Yeah, I think our storytelling has definitely evolved over the last few years, and it is really complementary to the rest of our strategy. So primarily we're focused on grant making to community groups. And then in addition to that, we do capacity support like executive coaching, communications, mini grants, like all sorts of things to help organizations strengthen and be sustainable and grow on their own terms. And then there's this piece around amplification, which includes storytelling. And that really is about helping communities tell their own stories and connect them to this broader ecosystem of funders and potential supporters in this global audience. And I think that is a huge place where Alex has played a role, whether it is film and storytelling per se, or like doing a fireside chat with one of our grantee partners at a big conference and just elevating their voice alongside his. It's something that we can offer that I think is unique to the Honnold Foundation. In terms of our TV and storytelling around film, that has also evolved quite a bit. And the most recent film that we helped produce was made by an Indigenous filmmaker collective about the solar powered boats in the Amazon that I mentioned. And it's such a dreamy, like kind of river-like meandering story. It's beautifully shot and not at all the sort of like standard narrative documentary that you'd get if you sent like an American filmmaker to Ecuador, right? And it is something that they're using for local advocacy with communities in the Ecuadorian Amazon to help people understand the impact of solar-powered transportation and how that protects their culture and their land. And so stories have so many different forms of power. And this is one where when we help local people tell their stories on their own terms, whether or not Alex is like appearing on screen, we can help elevate that and connect them to new audiences and then provide them tools to do advocacy and community building work in their local areas as well. And all of those goals matter, right, when it comes to renewables.
I got a glimpse of that film during your event during Climate Week last year in New York, where Alex, you hosted a fireside chat with Bill McKibben around how storytelling for climate really needs to change and move on from the doom and gloom and sort of fear fostering message that's really defined it for, say, the first 20 years. I'm curious how that event landed for you. Alex, you've said that storytelling isn't really the key focus, or that it's not really necessarily what either motivates you or where you see the most impact. Yet you still had a sold out crowd of probably a few hundred people at least at the middle of Climate Week during a really busy time, probably many influential people in the room. So obviously there was something that drove that. And I'm sure that you looked back at it and decided whether or not to do things like that again. How did that feel for you? And how influential do you think moments like that are that the foundation's creating?
Yeah, it felt great. I mean, and for me, the highlight of that event was meeting Bill McKibben. He was a personal hero, and I've read many of his books. And to me, events like that just represent the overall growth and sort of maturity of the Honnold Foundation over the years. I mean, in terms of impact on the audience and all that, I'm really grateful to be able to share the film, and I'm glad that people were able to learn from our partners and experience what life in you saw the film. It's like it's a slice of life for sure. Sure, a lot. You really feel like you're living in the Ecuadorian Amazon. You're like, this is the different world. And it's nice to be able to share that, particularly with a New York City audience where like you can assume that most people have not thought about those kinds of things. Certainly not that day, if not ever. It's all great, but ultimately, to me, the work is always what matters the most. I think that events like that, and even storytelling, is only important in service of the work. And so as long as projects are getting done, as long as there's a real tangible impact on people's lives, then that's great. But you just don't want to fall into the negative tropes around like big philanthropy and stuff where it's like just hosting galas and just schmoozing and doing things. Cause like ultimately the work is what matters. Like as long as you're having an impact in the world, that's what matters. And so all the events around that are only in service of the work.
Yeah, I think we've had a few potential partners and funders in the past say, oh, well, we just really want to amplify the work. But then who's funding the actual work that needs to happen? And so ultimately, it's a way for us to connect our partners to new audiences and potential other funders and to amplify their solutions. But if we're not supporting the on-ground work, there's really nothing to talk about.
If you're not doing the work, there's nothing to amplify. That's the whole thing. At a certain point, you have to actually do the work. And that's the whole thing. That's the hard part. That's true of so many things in life. When people are like, oh, I just want to like talk about the thing. And you're like, no, you have to do the thing. And that's the hard part. Like doing the thing is the part that's freaking hard.
You guys have done a lot of the work by finding $100 million of investment or funding opportunity for shovel-ready projects that will bring solar to communities that need it, and that will, as you've described, really tangibly change lives. And I think that's where I get excited about the role that you're playing of being not just a direct funder, but being a catalyst. Curious, what's in store for the future? What are you thinking about in terms of trying to not just have more of impact to the funding that you're doing, but to be more catalytic?
Yeah, I think we're obviously at a difficult moment for climate and energy work in the US and just a lot of uncertainty globally. And so, there's so much emphasis in climate around big bets and investing in institutions that, are going to grow large on their own. And having worked in a lot of places around the world where democracy was in question, small projects in a distributed network doing work that's collaborative, but maybe not centralized is one of the most sustainable forms of continuing to do work that might not be popular at the national level or might face forms of oppression or repression. And so I think our model is poised to continue and scale because it's responsive to local community needs, and it's something that scales as a network versus single institutions that are easier to target when sort of the political winds blow in a different way. That's something we're focused on. And the other is just to mobilize a coalition of other philanthropists to feel the urgency that grassroots and frontline communities already feel. My own little soapbox rant is institutional philanthropy that takes 12 months or 18 months off to do their strategic plan and doesn't grant make and pauses their work. And like the same applies, right? Like you got to do the work to talk about the work or to strategize about the work. And so we hope to continue to mobilize a coalition of philanthropists to invest quickly. It's not about building up your endowment. And it's something I think Alex has been committed to from the beginning is like, we don't build up an endowment, we resource the the work on the ground as quickly as possible because the moment demands it. And that's what we're going to continue to do.
Alex, when you and I were last together, I think I might have surprised you with how I see the impact of your climate commitment. Yes, the foundation is small. The 10 million or so that you've deployed doesn't, of course, compare to, say, the billion-dollar commitments that we see from, say, Rockefeller Foundation. But I realized you might not fully appreciate your own cultural footprint. The three of us actually met a couple years ago during Climate Week at an event at a large corporation. You might not know how much people talked about you being there, about the bold comments that you made and how it pushes thinking more generally. How do you think about the cultural footprint that you have and the cultural footprint of the foundation and the influence that you can have, not just on your fans, but also stakeholders who have a lot of power?
Honestly, I don't really think about the cultural impact at all. I've always just thought about the actual physical impact in the real world. So in the case of the Honnold Foundation, I think about that means projects getting done, like panels on roofs, like solar getting deployed, however you want to measure it. I think about real tangible impact. And cultural impact, like people talking about the things that you're doing or people thinking about their own decisions because of having met you or something, that's all great if it translates into action. But if it doesn't translate into action, then what's the point? It's like the world has a lot of issues. Like basically there are a lot of things that need to get done. And if your impact doesn't help those things get done more, then what's the point?
Well, let me reverse engineer this and take it a different way for you. Have you been in rooms where you felt that you actually influence some of those stakeholders that have a lot of power and help push them to think more boldly or to move more aggressively?
I honestly have no idea. The thing is, I think you can have interesting conversations with people, and I've certainly been in a lot of public events. When I talk about donating a third of my income to a nonprofit, or even just if I talk about lifestyle stuff, like for me as a rock climber, I've always been totally content doing the thing that I do. I love the thing that I do, and I can give away the rest and focus on environmental issues. It's like it all seems easy because I think I have really clear motivations in life. I know what I want, and I don't need more than that. And I think for certain audiences, you talk about things like that and they're like, whoa, I've never thought about life that way. Like I thought I needed a mega yacht before I could, and you're like, no, you don't need any of that stuff. That said, if they don't wind up taking action on that in some way, then who cares? You know what I mean? Like you can have a great conversation, you can make people think, but if it doesn't actually change what they do in the world, that hasn't had a real impact.
Let's go deeper into Alex's personal philosophy, because I think it's interesting. And also, I think there's a lot of people who look up to you for what you've achieved in climbing. As a climber, I know a bit about plateaus and injuries and aging and all sorts of things that make progress and persistence challenging. When it comes to working on climate, we need a lot of persistence. Do you have any advice from your climbing experience about how to work through those plateaus or find the persistence we need for this long engagement around climate?
I think part of it, obviously, it's easier with climbing in some ways because the inherent act of climbing is so fun. But I think that's the thing with climate too, is if you find the area that you're interested, you find the thing that you love to work on, it makes it easy to just keep working away at it because you like what you're doing. In our case, I think with the Honnold Foundation, I just love solar. I don't know. I just think the solar is the future. I think it's the answer to so many different problems. And so, it doesn't feel like we need persistence. It feels like we just keep doing the thing that we love to do. It's like, oh, this is something that I think is important and that we like doing, has an impact. And so we just keep doing it and keep doing it. And I feel like all the terms like grit and persistence and all that, I'll always note doing something that you don't want to do. Oh, I just have to grind through this. But the thing is, if you love doing it, then it's a pleasure. Like you get to go climbing every day. Like I'm actually totally beat right now because I had a 16-hour day on the mountain yesterday, like climbing this thing. And I'm like kind of wrecked and my lips are all chapped and I feel like my fingers, like basically I'm destroyed. But I'm kind of like, is there anything I would rather have done yesterday? I would have preferred that it wasn't quite as hot on the wall and that I didn't get quite as wrecked. But it's like I'm doing the thing that I love to do and it's great. And so I think that you don't need that kind of persistence if you're on the right path, if you're doing something that has value to you.
Tell us about the wall. Where were you? For climbers, how would you describe it?
I was climbing this mountain called the Incredible Hulk. It's this giant shard of granite sticking out of the High Sierra in California. But I did it as a day mission. Typically people hike in and they camp and then they climb the wall and then they camp and then they hike back out. But my friend and I drove from where I'm staying with my family in California and then drove there, hiked in, climbed the wall, hiked out, drove back. And it turned out to be a lot more than we bargained for. It's at relatively high elevation. It's 11,000 feet. And so neither of us had been up that high. And so we just felt tired and slow. And then the wall that we were climbing was pretty hard and it was really sunny and we got just completely cooked. But that's the nature of the adventure. You just go out and try something.
Ropes or no ropes yesterday?
Yeah, ropes. We were doing something quite difficult. We used the ropes extensively. We fell off many times.
Alex, any closing thoughts? What does the future hold for the Honnold Foundation, and how do you hope to do more work and help others do more work?
We have a $100 million pipeline. Hopefully the future helps us find $100 million somewhere to fund all these different projects. I think we just keep doing what we're doing, try to raise more, try to give more, and try to keep finding great projects like this. Somewhat both inspiring and somewhat sad reality is that we only get to fund a tiny fraction of the good ideas that we see each year. And I think for me personally, the challenge is to help fundraise faster. It's because anything we raise gets given away. And these are all projects that have an immediate, tangible impact on human lives. And you're sort of in a way, it feels like a moral imperative. We're kind of well, if you know that these opportunities exist and you're not funding them, you're are you doing harm to these people? Because you could do so much to help these communities, but you're not. You're kind of oh, are you morally required to? I don't know. Anyway, basically, I think the Honnold Foundation will just keep doing what we're doing, try to raise more, try to give more, and just stay the course.
Emily, Alex, thank you both for the work that you're doing and for your time today.
No, our pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Invested in Climate. Please remember to rate us on Apple, Spotify, or Google. Find show notes, sign up for updates, get in touch, and visualize your climate action at investedinclimate.com. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial, accounting, or legal advice. Thanks again.